My guest today is Marc Grabowski, and we're going to be talking about how to develop better managers in technology companies, and particularly in digital media. Marc has held executive roles at companies like Criteo and Yahoo. He was the COO of Nanigans and the CEO at Persio. And most recently, he was the global group vice president at Oracle in charge of their go-to-market for their advertising product. I have seen firsthand that Marc leads with passion, conviction, and integrity. And the teams that he has had under him have responded and respected those qualities. Marc, thank you so much for joining me today.
James, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be part of this series.
Excellent. Well, thank you. In most of these questions, I want to focus less on individuals and more on how to set up programs to ensure that companies have good management practices. But before we get there, I want to level set on what makes a good manager. And I have worked with people who, in my opinion, have been effective executives, but poor managers, and vice versa. So in your mind, what makes a good manager? What makes an effective executive? And what makes a good leader in a company? And how do you view the skills that support each of those roles?
You know, years ago, I was talking to a leader who I worked with, and he helped me define management versus leadership. And I think you bring another piece in terms of being a good executive into the fray here. I always think of a manager as someone who helps teams get stuff done, manage metrics, and are the doers, the deliverers on the front line. Leaders, I usually think of as people who can set a strategy in place, who can motivate people, who can get people to align around a key deliverable. And executives, a good executive needs to be able to do both and to be able to go through the different layers and understand what does the company need to deliver? How do we set objectives on the team levels so that every single person on the team knows that what they're doing today is important and has an impact. I've seen some some managers who are very effective at managing a day-to-day, but cannot really bring that sort of passion of leadership to the table. And I think that's one of the areas that it's a learned skill. It takes time to develop, but if you have enough passion for it, you can develop that. So I do think that great managers bring that leadership to the table, and great leaders can really set the tone for their teams and help those team members follow along with that.
Let me push on that a little bit, because the way you're thinking about it, it's almost like a executive is a senior person to a manager, which is often the way a lot of companies do their titles. Like manager is the first management experience that you have. I think how I've often thought about it, manager means people manager and the development of the skills of the teams underneath them. And often executive means sort of a way of engaging at a more strategic level within an organization. It sounds like for you, an effective leader needs to have both, but how do you think about the different skills that make up the sort of people manager versus effective executive?
Yeah, I've never really loved the term people manager, but I know what you're saying in terms of having a team of people that you are directly overseeing, what their responsibilities are. I think of the management function itself as one where it's delivering on those metrics, delivering on whatever your objective as a team that you've set forward to do. That's the management piece. That's the breaking down the overarching objective and saying, all right, these are the roles the different people on my team have to achieve to get there. These are the ways that we can look at metrics and deliverables to get there. Another piece that a manager can often be responsible for is finding out how to build those bridges across teams. I think that's one area that early managers don't recognize all the time, but as you sort of get into your management career, how do you build those different bridges from your team to other teams? How do you find out how teams can work best together? I think of management as a specific discipline. Leadership, I think, encompasses management, but I think it also encompasses vision, being able to drive that vision, being able to drive that excitement across an organization. And great executives, I think, have to do it all. I think they really have to be able to take a vision to the company, sell it up, sell it across, get investment, get time to invest, and then explain to their teams why this is something that they should buy into. And if the teams don't buy into it, they need to be open-minded and hear what their team members are saying, and then make changes as according.
As I mentioned in the introduction, you have experience in both relatively small companies and relatively big companies. And again, bringing my own personal beliefs, you kind of need to do both over the course of your career to learn the skills. I've often said, I don't believe that I could have been effective going straight from a startup to Yahoo if I hadn't done a stop along the way at Microsoft to really get a sense for how different a big corporation can operate. Let me push you on the question of what are the skills that someone needs to focus on in a small company versus a big corporation to be successful?
I think it first makes sense to think about the major differences between small and large companies. And again, these are generalizations. So different companies are going to function differently. But often you see that small companies can be more nimble and move faster. They have less layers that you need to go through for approvals. And depending on the size of that company, you can maybe talk to the person in go-to-market who's going to be sitting right down the hall from you, or the person in legal, or wherever it is. So you can have that conversation, share your perspective, and then make some change relatively quickly. Large companies, you don't always have that luxury. Sometimes you do, but sometimes you don't. And as a result, the cycle of change happens slower. So I think that one of the areas that large companies that leaders need to have is a level of patience, but at the same time, urgency. And I think that's a hard balance to strike, where you want to get things done quickly, but you have to also understand that not every hill is one to die on. The other piece with a small company that's great is you can, it's very easy to have conversations, one-on-ones, sit with your team members, see them face to face in many cases, and understand a lot about different processes through collaboration. Larger companies, sometimes you don't have that opportunity. If you're managing a 10-person team, it's easy to spend time with your team members a couple times a day. If you're managing a 100 or 1,000-person team, it's much harder. So I find that some of the things that you do in a small company get lost when you're overseeing a much larger team or functioning in a bigger organization. And I think that's a mistake. I think that's one of those things that one-on-ones, team meetings, skip-level conversations, they become even more important when you're managing a large organization. It's one of the things I've always sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, in that small company versus big company, how do you think about the right allocation of time? And I'll give you a personal example. I don't think I initially knew that I needed to allocate more time to sort of networking with peers in a big company, and sort of even just doing the rounds, explaining what my team does. If you come out of a small company, as you say, you can meet at the coffee pot and everybody knows what your team does, or at least they might have a sense. In a bigger company, and I hate to use the phrase, you have to sell it, but you really have to make people aware of what your team does. And so your time allocation is different. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever broken it down to a specific time allocation of when I need to sell ideas through to peers, or when I need to hear and understand what each of my peers or other team members do. It's more of a function of that's part of the process. So I don't know if it's necessarily a specific time allocation, but time does need to get allocated to it. What I will say is, one of the things that I found that's very helpful is, especially when you're managing large organizations and matrixed organizations that have different functions, is spending time within each of the functions. So I'll give you an example. At Criteo, I was managing our global supply organization that had a function that was a commercial organization, had a technical account management organization, data science, product, supply quality, and brand safety. And there's no way that I could be an expert on every single one of those functions on a daily basis. You can't do that. But at the same time, I had great leaders in my organization who are managing each of those functions. Each of them would come with a specific set of asks or needs or things that needed to get done. For me to truly understand them, I needed to have a better level of subject matter expertise than just like a 1 on a scale from 1 to 10. So what I would do is each couple of weeks, I would do a rotational. So I would spend a week going very deep into supply quality and brand safety, and sit on meetings, have every conversation that needs to be had within that organization and across that organization as though I was actually leading that group. Now, I probably wasn't qualified to lead any one of those groups, but it was really important to be able to get into those conversations and see what my leaders were going through and and kind of those underlying stress points that each of them had. So once you do a 1 week or 2 week rotational, you get a better understanding of what each leader and what each team is going through. Then when they bubble something up to you, they say, this is urgent and important and needs to get done. You actually have context there. So so that's the way that I usually spend time, not only going deep into my own organization, but going across. And it's around a specific topic, and it's at the kind of behest of one of my leaders.
Okay. One of the toughest transitions for anyone in their career is the first time they become a manager. And I'm going to use the phrase again, a people manager, and I'm not talking about sort of what I'd call fake management of 1 or 2 direct reports, but a real team under you. And suddenly you realize that you have to change your mindset. And a lot of people struggle with that. They struggle with how they should spend their time and how they should learn to be a manager. What is the advice that you have for someone in that first year or two in a management role, dealing with people issues for the first time, often wanting to demonstrate still their skills as an individual contributor and not realizing that the game has changed for them?
I think that's the hardest thing for any new people manager to do is they probably got promoted into that role because they're very strong individual contributors, and they're probably one of the best, if not the best, on that team or in a similar team at doing that job. So it's always difficult to say to give guidance and not do for your team. So I think there are a couple of things that need to happen. One is that that new manager needs to very quickly understand what the objectives of the overall team are. So working with their leaders and their executives to understand what do we have to accomplish to be successful as a team, as a unit at the end of this quarter, at the end of this year. Share that back with the team. Make sure the team's aware and you have buy-in from the team on those overarching objectives across the team. Then it's a matter of sitting down with each of those team members and determining what their objectives and key results are, what their KPIs need to be, and how they can actually deliver against those KPIs on a quarterly, monthly, weekly basis, whatever it might be, to be successful as a team. The manager then, in terms of keeping those team members accountable, has to have those follow-up conversations, follow-up meetings, and jump into problems where they can help to solve those, but only to a certain level. If they find that they're solving all of the problems individually and doing the work for the team, they either haven't set the direction right or they have the wrong team members. The second challenge I think a lot of new managers have is they probably had a lot of issues with the way that things were done across teams that they could highlight before they were a manager. And now that they're a manager, they don't immediately go into fixing those issues and building those bridges across teams. As I kind of think about leaders, managers, executives, it's sort of like building infrastructure, building roads. An executive needs to lay out, this is where we need the roads and this is why we need the roads and the bridges there. The leader needs to make sure the team can buy into that. The manager needs to actually go and get those roads and bridges built. And if you use that sort of as a mental model, the manager needs to understand where those bridges need to be built across teams to take some of that stress off of their team, to take some of that workload off their team, if it's something that needs to fall into other teams. So again, set the KPIs and objectives for their team, and then take the extra friction out of the system.
How, as a new manager, do you know how much to jump in, how much advice to give? And again, I'll give context from an example of my own career. One of the most difficult management roles I had was when I was managing a team of very disparate experience. Someone was effectively, straight out of university, 1 or 2 years out. Someone was 10, 15 years into their career. And the types of conversations that you're having with those people are very different. And I imagine very challenging for a new manager. How, as a new manager, do you make that judgment call as to how much advice to give, how much to lean in, how much to tell someone how to do that job?
Yeah, it's going to be different on every occasion, as you mentioned. And I often try to think about what is the person bringing to the table that's unique and that's good. No one is going to be perfect in all aspects of the role, but what role does that person play on the team to help the team? And then is that individual contributor learning? Are they improving over time? Are they improving quickly enough? If you find that you're giving guidance and advice and helping, but those people aren't internalizing it, there's another problem. There might be a training issue. There might be an understanding issue, a communication issue, but you've got to kind of unstick that piece. If they're learning, if they're improving, and you can see that they're on the right path to be a greater contributor, then you're probably leaning in enough. The other is to speak with, normally when someone's in their first level manager role, there are other managers who are going to have similar roles. They're not a standalone in their organization. So talking with their peers and having that conversation to understand how some of those team members have progressed on their teams, understand good experiences and not so good experiences they've had with team members and how they've managed through it can be very helpful. As a manager, you're not out there on your own. It feels like it at some point, but it shouldn't be a lonely job. You have a lot of peers probably to lean on, whether they're in your company or other companies, where you can have a similar conversation, actually work through some of those specific examples. You shouldn't be afraid of networking, having those conversations.
Okay. We've talked about individuals and individual managers, but when you think about the sort of what is the systematic areas that most companies need to pay more attention to when it comes to either developing good management skills or slightly broader, good corporate decision making?
Yeah, that's the decision making is an interesting one. And in terms of general management skills, I think that there are a few things that can be taught and kind of institutionalized throughout an organization. The first is understanding who actually owns a decision. So first off, align initiatives, make sure that everyone knows where you're supposed to be going, when you've got to get it delivered by, and why it's important. So understanding the why becomes very important. Everyone's read Simon Sinek at this point. A lot of people have read Extreme Ownership, and you have to understand mission clarity and where we're going. Great. Then it's a matter of defining what is the decision that needs to be made. And what I try to do early in that process is roll out, and it sounds very consultancy, and it is, but the rapid decision-making process. And if for anyone who hasn't laid out rapid, it's recommend, agree, perform, input, and decide. And each person within a process is assigned one or some of those different roles. I won't go too much into detail there, but the most important thing there is to identify who the decision maker is, who owns the decision. I try to do that before you go into the debate, before you start to lay out all of the casework to make the decision, because often you get to the end of the negotiation and three people think that they own the decision, and then it becomes a fist fight. So I think it's very important to lay out what each person's role is in getting to that decision, and for people to identify that, no, I don't own this decision, James does, and that you're going to align behind that, and that other people will bring that piece to the table. That is the role of an executive as well, to lay out how are we going to identify decision makers, how are we going to identify what your role is in making this decision, and what are those those North Stars that we have to align around to drive that decision.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question about intensity, but to ask the question, I have to talk about your intensity. And I think one of the first times I met, we were in a gym together, and you saw me and you recommended a workout that was called the 300 workout. It was like 50 pull-ups, 50 press-ups, 50 deadlifts, and so on. And I couldn't do the workout, and I trained up. And after a couple of months later, I came back to you and I was like, Marc, great news. I did the workout. And you're like, how long did it take you? It's like 50 minutes. And you were like 50, like 50? Oh, that can't be right. I think I took 22 minutes. I was like, 22? Do you remember the caveat or your response for how you managed to get it done in 22 minutes?
I think you're probably going to remind me of how I got it done in 22 minutes.
I think you said that you had to stop and throw up a couple of times to get it done. And so, again, no judgment, but it gives you a sense for how intense and passionate you are when you take something on. So actually, let me ask the question. You have a lot of drive, a lot of intensity. Two-part question. How do you inspire similar levels of drive and intensity in those around you and those that you're leading? And if you're not seeing that passion and intensity as a manager and a leader, what do you do?
Yeah. So first off, that was a good 10 years ago, that 300 work. And I'm pretty sure right now it would take me the better part of an hour as well. So let's start right there. And I'm also confident that you can squat, bench, and deadlift a whole lot more than I can these days, James. So let's not downplay that. But when sorry, go ahead.
Go on.
When it comes to intensity, I don't know. I think we're all wired a little bit differently, and I think that's one thing to call out. For me, I tend to I'm like a dog on a piece of meat when I'm going after something. I get really interested in it. I go after it 100%, and it's just sort of that's the singular focus. There's a book called The One Thing, and I sort of believe that there's only really one thing that you can do 100% and be that focused on. I think that we all try to be balanced and spend our time doing all these different things. It's very hard for me to do that. I try to go all in all the time on just like on a given thing. But I think that there has to be a good why behind that. There has to be a good purpose for it. For that workout, or for if I'm running an ultra marathon, ultra marathons are one of those things. I do these races now that are 50 miles or 100 miles. Like nobody can really run 100 miles and not feel some pain. It's going to hurt. It's going to suck. Your body's going to break down. Your mind's going to break down. But the only thing that's going to get you through it is having a really strong purpose and why you started that. And I've luckily always, or almost always, had a good purpose and why to get to the end of that, to that race. And it's the why is stronger than my excuses. And I think that's a really important thing. I think it's similar when you're talking about driving a team. The team's got to understand what their purpose is on the project, what their purpose is on the team, how they can drive that success for themselves and for their team members. When we think about different motivators, there's you can go to the Maslow's hierarchies of needs. There's the really basic ones, the food, shelter, safety ones. But when you start to go a little bit further up in that hierarchy, it's how do people create peer relationships? How do they feel like they're part of a community, like they're a contributing member of a community? How can they help other people win? How can they be in the service of others? Those are the types of things that I find that are really motivating for team members when they can get to that actualization that they're an expert in something, that they're driving value for not just for themselves but for other people. That usually becomes one of the primary motivators for that intensity. It's different for different people, but I found that's normally pretty commonplace.
Let's talk about management specifically within the digital media industry. And I think there's a couple of common characteristics or challenges. One is it's an industry that, while becoming mature now, is still evolving very quickly in terms of how standards are used, who the dominant players are, how the ecosystem evolves. Basically the number of things that a manager should be worried about is constantly growing. What does that mean in terms of how a manager or an executive within digital media needs to operate differently than a manager or an executive in other industries?
Well, I think there are a few things. One, digital media moves very fast from a technical standpoint, from a privacy standpoint, regulations, all of those pieces. So I think that there's, in terms of needing to keep up and do the right thing, those have become increasingly more important in the last decade. There was a time where, again, we use the terms Wild West a lot. And, if you think about digital media in 2000, 2003, 2005, we were just paving the way at that point. And we were all trying to do the best that we could. But, then the revenue started to grow, the size companies started to build out, the number of people coming to the space increased, and we still didn't have the controls that we needed. And I think that kind of puts us in a strange spot that we're in today, where there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of privacy requirements. So we have to move quickly in terms of addressing those. The other is the consumption habits change, formats change, channels change. At one point, it was just text on a screen. Then it was display and video and CTV and mobile and all these different formats. And when you take those formats plus privacy and regulations, and then a global scale, because this is no longer just one country that you focus on at a time. You have to focus on global scale. All of a sudden, you have to be making the right decisions that can actually stand the test of time. So I think that when we think about the digital space, there's just a lot of change. It moves quickly, and we have to think about those decisions of how are we going to look back on these decisions in 10 or 20 years and say, did we do the right thing to sustain that industry and that model at that time? And this is interesting, because the people who are in individual contributor all the way up to executive roles now are the ones who are going to determine if this industry sticks around or grows over the next 20 or 30 years.
Brilliant. Thank you. As we start to come to a close, any closing thoughts on either common mistakes that you see managers make that aren't discussed enough, or thoughts that you have in terms of where people should be taking more time and attention around their management practices?
Well, there are a few on that. Maybe we can kind of break those down. We'll maybe start with the mistakes, then kind of end on a higher note of where people can spend the time. The mistakes that I think a lot of managers make is, managers, we all make, I should say, many mistakes, whether it's leading from an ivory tower, and being too hands off, or just being in the weeds all the time and micromanaging. Both are bad, and it's finding that middle ground. And the thing is, it's also going to be team member by team member. Some are going to want you to be more involved and more hands-on, and some are going to want you to just set direction and back off. So there is no one management style that's going to work for all team members. I think a second thing, and I recognize this when I first got a C-level title, or maybe second time got a C-level title kind of doesn't matter. It matters on your LinkedIn for a minute, but it doesn't matter to your team. If you're not bringing value to your team, it does not matter if you're a VP, a CEO, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is how can you bring value to your team and to your partners and customers on a daily basis. So I think that the mistake that a lot of managers think is that all of a sudden from one day to the next, they're automatically empowered and people are going to fall in line. It just isn't going to happen unless you're bringing them some value. Another issue is not performance managing. And I know this sounds like it's one of those like, you gotta fire people and move people out. That's not necessarily the case, but it's very, very important for people to know what success looks like, and to live by that, and to deliver on that. Hold yourself accountable, but also make sure that your team is accountable. A players want to work with A players, and they see a lot of people slipping by on a daily basis. They don't want to be there, so you'll start to lose the A players. So keep your team accountable, but make sure that they know what success looks like. I think another is when people think linearly about talent, of like, well, you're in this individual contributor 1 role, your next is individual contributor 2. I think there are a lot of times where there are leaders that are buried in your organization that you need to jump up several levels because they've got a great opportunity to lead and they're just getting buried there. And if you don't move them quickly, they're going to find another role elsewhere. So identify that talent and continually find ways to get them onto new projects and into new roles. And I think that the last one, as I kind of think through this, I wrote an article on this recently. Don't be an idiot and don't be a wimp. So when people take on a new role, I take this from running as well. So in marathons or ultra marathons, the first half, don't be an idiot. Don't go out too fast. But in the back half, don't be a wimp. It's going to hurt. It's going to be hard. Get over it. And A lot of managers will get into a new role and they'll just immediately make change and try to bring their own team in. And a lot of the good people on the team are like, they're not listening. He's not listening to me, and they leave. So take some time, take a beat, but then once you know the right direction, don't be whim. Make the hard decisions and move forward. So those are some kind of pitfalls that people fall into.
Hey, thank you so much for taking the time. I always find it incredibly useful talking to you, and I hope others get some benefit from your wisdom. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, James, thanks so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Excellent. We'll catch you later.